Hello and welcome to the reformerpilates.com podcast. Today I'm joined by Nic Lenny. Nic is the founder of Soul Pilates and host of the hugely respected Beyond the Reformer podcast, where she explores the deeper conversations shaping the worlds of Pilates, wellness and boutique fitness. Known for her thoughtful, honest and often refreshingly unfiltered discussions, Nic has become one of the industry's leading voices on movement, business, burnout and the evolving wellness landscape. I am also slightly nervous interviewing because someone who is quite clearly a bigger and better podcaster than me. But Nic, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Karl. It's so wonderful to be here. What a lovely introduction. I'm also very nervous, however, being on the other side of the questions because it's scarier being on this side than your side, I think. So it's lovely to be here.
Well, this conversation could go in a number of different directions, but I suppose we're keen to address some of the thornier topics, I suppose you might say. So first question, boutique fitness has exploded over the last few years, but it feels like the market has shifted. What feels fundamentally different about running a wellness business today compared to, let's say, 3 years ago?
And it's such a great question because I think, it is amazing how even in the last few years, things have shifted. It's fundamentally become an incredibly competitive space. There's a lot more businesses out there. There's a lot more noise out there. And I think it's become quite confusing for consumers. I think there is lots of different styles among the studios, and yet it's all called the same thing. And I think that becomes confusing. And then I also think with the sort of birth of AI, we're all using it as an incredibly powerful tool, but it has made everyone sound very much the same. And so I think that provides a challenge for the consumers understanding what studio do they pick. And also for us as studio owners, understanding like, how do I create a marketing message that cuts through and gets people to really understand what my studio is about versus somebody else's studio that sounds exactly the same as mine. But if I go there, it's actually got a very different style and ethos. So I think that's the big challenge really, is around how do we compete and how do we do it in a way that stays true to our values and understanding what they are.
You mentioned there that the marketing challenge, right? People looking at the same sources of inspiration or just inputting the same prompts into the same AI and getting the same outputs or close to. But it seems like there is a lot of pressure in boutique fitness to constantly evolve, constantly market and constantly be visible. Do you think there's a risk that, burnout is being normalized for founders and instructors?
I loved when you ask this question because I think it's a really important conversation to have. Most of us, maybe this is changing a little bit today, but most of us got into this work because we loved this practice in our own body. And I think it is a practice. And I think there's a huge challenge that now we're running studios. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of pressure in a way that there wasn't certainly 5 years ago. There really wasn't in the way there is. And I think a lot of us are not doing the practice. And this is more than just a fitness modality. Pilates is very much a practice. I passionately believe that we are here to teach. And I think the teachers that are out there and the studios owners that are out there, we're all forgetting to do our own practice, to look after ourselves. I saw a stat online earlier today, and it was talking about a piece of study that was done showing the benefits of Pilates versus antidepressants and how Pilates had a much bigger impact on our anxiety levels and depression levels. Like, it is this side of it that we all fell in love with. And I think one of the things I'm realizing in myself is, how do I make sure that I still show up for my practice and not just the 10 minutes where I run through a 60-minute class in 10 minutes, which we all do as teachers. So I think that is a part of it. I think we're getting so busy, we're forgetting to remember why we got into this. And it's a message that I have to my teachers and my students a lot is, let's not forget to be the client sometimes, because I think that is, when we're grounded and we're present and we're calmer, we can see wider, we can see the noise for what it is, and we can be clearer on what it is. But I think you're right. I think because it's so busy, we're forgetting to do that, and we are burning out. We are feeling under pressure. I certainly have moments like with the podcast now, I feel like my face is all over the internet and I have to, my team asked me to show up and do this, which inevitably means you're looking at social media and you're looking at other businesses, and it can just feel quite overwhelming. You can feel really insecure because, of course, what's out there and what's being promoted isn't necessarily the realities of life. And I think that can then lead into feeling this need to do more and do more. And I think one of the things that Pilates, I sometimes joke that Pilates changed my life, and people think it's because I left the corporate world to become a Pilates teacher. But it changed my life before that. I think I realized in order to do the advanced work, I had to find more ease. I had to find more efficiency. I had to find, I definitely am not very good at doing nothing. I'm not very good at relaxing. And Pilates was a big part of teaching me that. And I remember having this day one day where I thought, I wonder if I could take this idea into my life. Like maybe I could. And I realized that maybe I'd been slightly lied to my whole life, that life always had to be about doing more and working harder and putting more hours in and working the grind. And what if life could be about actually being more efficient and more calm and more presence? And I think that's what the practice gave me. And I'm guilty of this too. And I'm really coming around to being like, I have to remember what this was and take it into my life. Because I think if we can run our businesses from that place and we can run our classes from that place, we get to be the teacher and showcase the work to our clients. They get to buy into that experience and not just the exercise side of it.
Great. I'd love to know how do you circle back to that then, Nic? When you do feel kind of slightly overwhelmed and stuff, as you say, you've got the podcast, you're spinning plates. What is it that you specifically do to come back and center and find that kind of efficiency again?
I think, it is finding Pilates for me. And it's finding the time, and it's going through your diary and imagining that it's a medical appointment that you will not miss, because it is that important. It has been that important to me. So many people I talk to on the podcast talk about how Pilates got them to know themselves more. Most people talk about how it slowed them down. And I think that's a big piece that's getting missed out there in the boom. And I know we're going to talk about the evolution of this work, but I think that's a piece that's being missed. And most people talked about how it slowed them down, and it slowed me down. So I think I'm remembering to make it a practice. Go to a class. And I don't need help with an advanced class. I often book into like a fundamentals type class. I need help slowing down. I need a class that's quite breathwork led. So that's been a part for me, a huge part, making sure that I'm going to a class. I'm trying to get some mat work in most days, if I can, in some shape or form, 10, 15 minutes. I do my best to try meditation, but it's hard. Pilates always was that meditation for me. So it's just trying to find ways that I can have that, moments of presence and breath work and feeling connected to myself. I think it's very easy, and I'm guilty of this too, of life gets so busy and you get very tunnel visioned. And it's remembering that we need to put these placeholders in our diary. I met Rael from Bassi in January when I was in Los Angeles, and he really inspired me because he was literally doing an hour and a half a day. And he looks incredible, and he has this insane presence about him. And he sort of said, I try and do 3 movement practices a day. I mean, he does live by the ocean and he surfs and he goes for a walk with his wife. But it really made me realize that we have to try our best to stop being pulled along on this big, fast-paced world, because lots of us left corporate jobs for that reason. We didn't like that, and we came into this work to do it differently. And I think now the world of Pilates is so big and busy, it's becoming a bit like that corporate rat race again. So it's nice to be reminded of this and then think about, how do I structure my time so I still have the reasons I got into this work?
Quick segue. Next question. And we've touched on it there. You just referenced how potentially it's becoming like a rat race now. And, we often hear about the success stories in wellness, but perhaps not the reality behind them. What are the conversations do you think the industry still avoids having?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing that came to mind was that this business is actually quite hard to make money in. There are plenty of people out there not making very much money, although seemingly looking busy. And there's a lot of people out there who can support with this, but you have to pay them, and it's like another comprehensive training to run a studio successfully. I think there are so many studios opening up. I go and look, when I've been looking for studios, I go and look at so many premises, and most of them don't work because fundamentally the maths does not work. And then I see somebody open a studio in that space. And I think people are looking at this now as a cash cow, and that if they open and they're busy, and there are plenty of studios that look busy, that their P&L is not the strongest at all. And I've been there, and I had to pivot my business. And I talked to lots of, one of the things I love about the podcast, I mean, now it's got big and I get to talk to these big, giants in our world, but I'm still passionate about talking to the everyday studio owners. And it's nearly always a conversation that comes up. And I'll tell you what, Karl, I get more DMs from those conversations than anything else. About people's struggles with VAT thresholds, with people's struggles with not being able to give pay rises to teachers, people not understanding that a 6 class is going to be a much harder sell from a financial perspective than a 12 class. And then people saying, but how do you make a 12 class, work and teach it in the depth? But then we're charging the 6-person class is the same as the 12-person class. And it's a complete different metric. You look at the world of yoga where they could have 40 people in a class. That's a very different metric. So I think that's a conversation that's not being had enough. And I think it always creates a lot of interest when we do, because I think it's a lean business. This is a lean business. I think all of us who were in there, and it's not to say you can't have an income out of it, you can, but there is an awful lot of work that goes into the structures, the processes, the systems to make your business thrive. And there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes to enable the teachers who are fundamentally our product to thrive. And I think that's often missed, and it kind of leans back into that burnout piece for studio owners. Lots of people got into running studios because they loved teaching, but being a good teacher doesn't equal being a good studio owner. And then you've now got the thing where Pilates is becoming so big that you've got business owners who know nothing about Pilates coming to open studios. And that has another challenge, because those studios then, they don't understand this modality. They don't understand how to get the best out of teachers. You've got lots of studios where, if we accept it's a confusing marketplace for consumers, it's also a confusing marketplace for teacher training. Teacher trainings have wildly different styles, ethoses, the way that we program classes, wildly different. And a lot of those studio owners who maybe don't understand Pilates are seeing that somebody's coming in with a Pilates teacher training certificate and they can teach whatever they want. And then the experience for the clients is poor, because the client is going to one teacher and being taught one way and going to another teacher and being taught a vastly different way. And so I think there's a lot of work in running a studio to get the money right and to also get the delivery of the experience right. And you need both of those for the studio to then be profitable and sustainable.
That leads on to the next question, I suppose, trying to look at how the reformer Pilates boom specifically, you just referenced like how big it is, which is, there's clearly opportunity for businesses to be sustainable long term, as you've just referenced. But I think you touched on this already. You see the trend driving non-sustainable foundations. Would that be fair to say?
I think I do. I have teachers who graduate from my teacher training programs being interviewed at a studio who is being run by someone who doesn't understand Pilates, but maybe they've got great business sense. And they're asking this brand new teacher, can you come up with the names of the class? How do we level it? How do we include, how do we price it? That's, and they come back to me and say, Nic, I have no idea what I'm doing. I graduated a week ago. So I'm not sure that's great business sense in any industry. You just, you need, if you're going to do that, if you're going to be, because there are business owners who do it. Some of the big brands out there have this, but then bring on board somebody who really knows what they're doing to help be your head of education, head of your teaching staff, so that you can do it. I think another big challenge at the moment is this idea that we need to keep evolving and that we need to keep making it newer and sexier. And I'm not stuck in it must be one way, far from it. But as I sort of said before, Pilates is magical for the reasons it's magical. It slows us down. It gets us connected. We learn, we're educated on how to move our bodies. And I think there's been quite a big piece now in confusion out there around the messaging. And I think this is then leaning into studios coming and feeling like they need to be something new. And so they don't have the foundations. They're also trying to do something new. And it's worrying. And we've seen this happen in other modalities. Not, Pilates is the newest one for this to happen to. So we've seen this happen before. And we don't want these studios to go bust. I don't want these studios to go bust. I know how much work and money goes into opening a studio. But it's always worrying to see them out there. And then they're creating the noise, which is confusing the client's understanding of what Pilates is and what it isn't, and the expectations that they've got going into those studios.
You mentioned there people coming into the industry from a pure business perspective, perhaps seeing what looks to be a very lucrative opportunity. You've got new instructors, relatively inexperienced, wanting to start their own studios as well. Would you say it's fair that kind of social media has fueled the growth of that kind of boutique fitness, but has it potentially distorted expectations around what success in the industry looks like as well?
My former life as a digital marketing director, social media was nothing like it was today. But if we look at social media, we have to understand how it works. It is worked on an algorithm, and the algorithm, they got into trouble with this recently. It's been proven that it works on extreme content, and that's extreme in every single, genre out there. And Pilates is no different. And I get to speak to some of the biggest social media stars in our world, and they're saying this to me. I'm having to put content out there that isn't reflective of anything I ever teach. And yet, you're coming out of a teacher training. And I think about this. I came out of my teacher training 15 years ago. Pilates Anytime had only just opened that year. It just started. YouTube videos are 20 minutes. There was no videos on social. I'd spent thousands of pounds on my training and thousands of pounds getting my hours and my mentoring and all of that. And that was a really good thing because, Karl, it meant that I had my manual. And that's it. And it meant that I had spent a lot of time and money learning that content inside out, back to front. And then I was like certified, and I still really only had my manual. And it meant that I got to take the work that someone had spent years working on, and this has been years in the making, and it comes from the work of Joseph Pilates. And I got to then explore it with real life clients and see how it landed. And I remember vividly being presented with, because I opened a studio straight out of qualifying because there were no studios in my city. I had no choice. And I remember being met with these clients with big, complex needs. And I'm thinking, I have no idea what to do with, I have no experience. And I thought, I'm just going to do what I've been taught. And these people's lives were transformed. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is insane. Wow, this stuff really works. The challenge you've got now is you're coming out, you're graduated, you've still spent thousands of pounds, you've still gone through the work, and you're being bombarded with the algorithm's extreme version of what Pilates is. And I think a lot of teachers, new, old, experienced and not experienced, are all getting confused about thinking that they need to deliver that in their studios. And especially the newer teachers, they don't know because they've not got the experience yet to realize that's not realistic. And it becomes performative. People feel like they're then trying to, it's the harder, the better. When I talked about Pilates changed my life, I was definitely sort of brought up in this way that more is always better, harder is always better. And I learned through my thousands of pounds and my hundreds of hours that in order to do the advanced work, which is often the stuff you're seeing on social media, I had to find the ease. I had to find the efficiency. Then my body could meet the challenge that it was being asked to do. And the social media is driving this confusion, I really believe, on what it is that we're supposed to deliver in our classes. And I think teachers are getting confused. They're then trying to deliver an exercise that they've seen. They don't understand where it comes from. They don't understand how to build people up to it because they haven't got that experience yet. And I think that's what's causing a big piece around this is the social media. I also think that, again, let's look at what works on social. It is a certain body type dressed in a certain way, being able to do performative, advanced moves. And if we think of our studios, that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing very normal people. And if you think about up to a few years ago, most people started Pilates because something hurt. They loved how this work made them feel, and they stayed for that reason. Their back got better, their knee got better, and then they were like, I feel amazing from this practice. And now people may be coming for different reasons, which is great. They're coming just to how it makes them feel, but they're often being met with these very big performative acrobatic type moves. They're being presented with marketing materials that make it look like only young, skinny, white people do Pilates. I get lots of comments when we talk about this on the podcast. It's the only time I've ever gone viral on TikTok. And I had so many people saying, I'm a mid-sized body. I feel like I cannot go to Pilates. I went to the studio and I didn't feel like, I felt included. And I think we're missing, I often joke that, the small fundamental moves that feel so much inside you are never on social media because they don't look sexy. And yet they're the movements that changed our lives. They changed how we moved. They healed the disc issues that we recurrently were getting. It was those moves, and they're never on social media. So I think there's this big mismatch. And I thought it was really interesting talking to these big stars who were saying, we're also finding this. My content isn't getting out there, despite the fact I've got 250,000 followers. I'm having to, this is my job. But I think people need to be aware that that's how it works. And so maybe don't look at it so much. And maybe, if you spent all this money on your manual, use it. Do what we've been taught. And it's not to say we should never adapt, but take some time in the work that you've learned and explore it. And then once you know it inside out, back to front, you can play with it, but you'll be able to play with it from a real place of knowledge and foundation. And I think that is possible, but I think people are getting there too quickly because social media is confusing what this is all about.
I couldn't agree more. Extremities in all aspects of society, be it politics, exercise, food, expectations, money. I mean, it's just, where do you stop? And who was to think it was going to be any different for Pilates? So
I think that's why sometimes we have to take a break from social media. And it goes back to your point about burnout. I think part of getting burnt out is that there's just a lot of noise, and we're all guilty of it. And the more we look at it, the more we can feel inadequate in ourselves, and we should be doing more. And sometimes we just need to be like, it's to your point, everything is extreme, and our world is no different. And we need to remember that.
Yeah. A topic I discussed with Mitch McGinley the other week was around kind of personalities being entrenched within their studios, right? And many studio brands are built around those personalities. But from your perspective, do you think that model is sustainable in the long term, or from your perspective, does it create some fragility in terms of how the business can grow?
I think studios need to do a much better job of understanding what their ethos is. How do we teach? What are we trying to create? What's the experience we're trying to create? So that when a client comes to your studio, they are a member or a client of your studio. They're not Nic's client or Karl's client or Alice's client, because I've definitely been caught out there before where then that teacher might leave and they're like, oh, well, I only want to go to that person's class. And I think if as a studio, and I've spent the last few years really working on this, if we spend time understanding, like, this is our ethos, this is how we program our classes, these are the do's, these are the don'ts, this is what happens in the class levels, and that we bring our team together. I certainly don't want everyone to be clones of me. I truly believe that a teacher's personality is their superpower, but they need to bring their personality to life, underpinned with an ethos that sits in the studio. I want people to come to my studio and feel like, oh, I love Nic's classes, but I also love this person's, and this person's. And depending on how I'm feeling as a client, I might pick the more up-tempo teacher, or I might pick the teacher who's a little bit more restorative and does a lot more breath work and mindfulness in the class. And I think as a studio, that's a really good strategy, because then people feel like they are part of your studio and not part of one person's personality. So it's not to say that I don't think there should be personalities, but they need to be anchored in an ethos that sits, which goes back to what I said earlier, which then is, then you talk about your studio like that, then you market your studio like that, and everything matches. So the person coming in gets what they've read about, and it matches. And there's a challenge as your studio builds, where how does one teacher teach a class versus another teacher, maybe the same class level? And I think if you don't spend time nurturing your teachers and bringing some consistency across, you end up with this quite mishmash of styles. And then you will have clients who only want to go to one person. And what happens when that person leaves? They'll want to leave you and they'll follow them. And so I think you have to kind of have this ethos, and that takes work to understand it. I've just written a document for my teachers. I just ran a 3-hour course for my teachers. It was like, we go back to this every couple of years, making sure everybody's there. And that what we find then is that teachers can bring their personality to life within this. And it means the clients have a really positive experience. I think that's what's needed for studios to be sustainable and allow teachers to have their individuality, but it to feel like, because obviously teachers work at multiple studios as well. And so they then hopefully will bring their personality to life at another studio, but it will be different because it will be underpinned by their ethos and not yours. And then that also helps clients feel like, okay, I want to be at this studio. That other studio is not quite my style.
I want to kind of switch back to a topic that you've touched on already, Nic, which is the kind of tension between, wellness as self-care and wellness as performance culture. So, you talked about the method and slowing down and that efficiency that it gives you. At the same time, clearly there's a growth of more cardio and performance orientated Pilates as well. But I want to get your sense. Where do you think the industry is heading?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to a little bit of the social media stuff as well. Like, so many people are out there professing to be experts and talking about these things. And I think it gets quite confusing. One of the things that was quite nice after COVID was that people valued their self-care. They valued the ability to go to a studio and spend money and have a really good experience and feel good, whatever modality that was. And that was really good. It was really nice to see, because we were all very worried, how were anybody going to come back? And they came back in abundance, with a commitment to looking after themselves that I don't think they'd had before. And that was really good. But now there's so much noise out there about what is wellness, what is well-being. I should be strength training. Should I be strength training or Pilates? Pilates isn't enough. I should be doing cardio. Pilates isn't enough. And as Pilates has got bigger, there's a lot of Pilates isn't enough conversations out there. Pilates was never meant to make you good at Pilates. Pilates is designed to make you good at life, to help you live your life better, with more vigor and zest, as Joseph Pilates said, to help you do whatever you need, whether that's your goal is, I want to be able to put my shoes on myself, I want to be able to be with my grandchildren, or I want to be able to run a marathon. It was designed for that. It was designed to get this ease, efficiency, balance into your body, so then you could challenge it. And, there are moves in Pilates we can challenge with, but there's lots of things in life we can challenge with. I think the noise out there has become, if we accept that we all probably should be doing a bit of strength training, we all should be doing cardio, and we all now are seeing that Pilates is brilliant. Let's put them all together. In theory, why would that not work? But it doesn't really work, because then it sort of loses the essence of why Pilates helped. I've recently taken up strength training. We're now understanding that we need to move differently at different times in our life, that I shouldn't be doing as much cardio as I was doing. I need to be doing more strength training. I'm doing it, and it's very like Pilates. It's very minute in detail. And my trainer says, wow, you can really take these instructions on. I've learned that in Pilates. I'm not sure if I tried to do strength training. And I kind of got into Pilates because I was of the time in the noughties of the boot camp. And I would do all of that, and my neck and shoulder would scream at me because I couldn't push myself. And so I think, Pilates really is underpinning, how do we get our body more efficient, more at ease? How do we, it's an education, it's a practice. And I really strongly believe that. And clients, that makes them stay with you. Who doesn't want to feel good about themselves? And it's not to say that we couldn't mix modalities together. I'm not saying, but then how do we ensure that we do it well? Because the Pilates teacher doesn't understand progressive overload. We've not been taught that. And a PT style teacher doesn't understand nervous system regulation. They've not been taught that. And so they're different modalities. And also, how are you supposed to do all of that in an hour? I'm not sure I can truly calm my nervous system and then ramp it back up again and then add a load of strength. So, I think that's where the wellness world has got quite confused. And fundamentally, this is about looking after yourself. And that is different for different people. I don't think that everybody has to, necessarily do Pilates. I mean, I do think Pilates is great for everybody, but I think people need to lean into what feels right for them and what helps them. The very busy type A people need help unraveling, slowing down, finding ease. And there are other people who, they're a much slower character in life and they love a bit of hit. And that really helps balance their nervous system out. So there isn't a one size fits all. And I really don't think we should be trying to compete against each other. These are complementary modalities that work. And the challenge with well-being, Karl, is that it isn't a one size fits all. And I think there are experts out there trying to make out that it is. That's why well-being and wellness is quite tricky. If you've ever been unwell, if you've ever had chronic health conditions, it can be really hard figuring out, how do I get better? I always joke, I could write a book and I could say, this is how you do it. And you would read it, Karl, and it wouldn't work for you because it was like my recipe. I love Pilates. I do things like Reiki. I love walking in nature. I recently took up tennis. I love my singing lessons. I'm loving learning Italian. Like these are things that I do to nurture my soul, but you do different things that work for you. And so I think we shouldn't be having these tit for tat, one is better than the other. I think when we do that, we start to then lose what Pilates was meant to be. It was never a strength piece in that sense, in a weight training sense. It's a completely different modality. And so I think it's just about understanding, let's stay in our lane and understand what we are and do it very well. But I think the challenge, it goes back to social media, is it's very confusing for people because everyone is an expert and they're all having a go at each other. And it must be hard these days would I have found Pilates now for my recurrent L5-S1 prolapse and my recurrent neck and shoulder pain? And if I did, would I go to a studio that would have healed me in the way that 17 years ago I found a teacher who did that? I'm not sure. And that makes me sad because it literally transformed my life and other people's. So I think that's kind of the challenge around this competing aspect of wellness. I'm not sure if I've answered that, but that's kind of what I think about when I think of those industries.
Yeah. Well, building on that kind of, and you just referenced all the stuff that you're taking on right now, right? Tennis and walking nature. And similarly, right? Are my protein levels level? Are my creatine levels?
Got to take the creatine. I'm on the collagen.
What's my Whoop telling me about heart rate variability? Is I'm now a competitive sleeper. But the point is that we've all got a lot more information. We are potentially more informed than we ever have been. But I guess that drives chaos and distraction, and we're potentially less loyal or committed to one thing. I remember when I was growing up as a kid, you generally had one sport, maybe you had two, spring, but you certainly didn't have everything on your plate as we do today in terms of all the various different things that you're trying to juggle and maintain for your wellness. But what do you think modern fitness consumers are really looking for now? Because there's just so much. It does potentially make it competitive in all different modalities. It makes you less loyal to anything. We're very transactional in taking what we want. So, how do you think the modern fitness consumer, what is it that they're really looking for, do you think?
I think in this busy world of noise and different modalities, and even within modalities, lots of options, I think the teaching experience needs to cut through. I think it's far more now than the sexy, pretty studio with the subpar standards. I think we as studio owners all need to be taking more time to do continuing ed with our teachers, like upskilling them, supporting them, mentoring them. I think that's the piece that cuts through. I also think that it is different. You know, my guidance to my friends are different depending on the age that they are and where, you know, what's going on in their life and the challenges that they're having in their bodies. So I think, you know, it changes, but we know that come 2030, more people are going to be over 50 than under 50 for the first time in history that we've measured. That means that longevity is more important than ever. And that's not really the direction that the fitness world in general is going. It thinks it's going there but actually, you know, longevity, it kind of goes back to what the method of Pilates was designed to do. Pilates taught in the method's way is brilliant for that. So that should put us all in a sense of ease as studio owners, because if we lean into the method, we're leaning into the way the industry is going to need to show up for people. I had someone come and visit me recently from Japan, because Japan has hit this point earlier and they are learning that they have big problems. And she said, I want to find a provider of a teacher training. And she was coming with her translator. I thought this was really interesting. And she said, you know, there isn't anything here. We're learning that we need to be putting on far more like practices for people that are sustainable. And so, you know, in all the noise that's out there, which is bigger is better, I think it's important to remember that statistical fact. And I'm not sure my 50, 60, I was talking to someone yesterday, 94, comes on as a private every week. He's our oldest client, 94, started this 2 years ago because his daughter, who is 60, came and loved it. They're the people, I think where else can they show up? And I think that's amazing that we can, I sort of joke, there was this one day where I was teaching a world #1 athlete. His goal was to have his longevity in his sport. And then the next hour I was teaching someone who was 81, and her goal was she couldn't lie down. And that meant she had a special bed to prop herself up. And it meant she couldn't go on holiday with her family. She couldn't stay overnight with her family. Within about 2.5 months, she could lie down and her life was transformed. What other modality has this range to it? And I think it's for us to understand that really to cut through, we need to be more comfortable teaching that range. It's not saying that we should teach everyone like they're the 81-year-old who wants this. But again, it goes back to the learning that we've done. The method really does do that. And we shouldn't be so influenced that we move so far away from that and feel like we need to be everything from everyone, because we know that strength training is really great for perimenopausal women. Great, go and do strength training then. That's not for me to do. I'm going to help you have the balance in your body to do that well. And I think that goes for any modality. But I think, to answer your question, I think what everybody needs is a mix. A mix. One thing isn't enough. I think we learned that, Karl, when we were like, we just do the gym or we just do this. Yeah, like you were saying, like it was very much, I think the education that's out there in a way is causing people to feel a little bit confused and maybe a bit overwhelmed. But I think what it's trying to do is say, look, you need to have a practice that slows you down, whether that's yoga, whether that's Pilates, something that feels more restorative. You need to have a practice that helps your cardiovascular health, be that a walk every day, be that you go running or cycling or whatever, like whatever works for that. And you need to have something that loads your body. I think we would all agree that we need that. I often say to people, I think you need to have like an energetic practice, like go and have some Reiki or go and do, reflexology. I'm not saying every week, but from time to time. Often people need to do a bit more talking therapy and kind of work through stuff. So I think that's kind of what we're learning. But to your point about all the devices, sometimes I think we are a little bit overwhelmed by all the statistics of our own body that can make us then feel like even terrified. I mean, I had to stop wearing my watch going to bed. I don't want to know that I've had a bad night's sleep. I already know. I don't need some statistics to tell me. So sometimes I think it's also just about detaching and realizing we're human beings. I don't necessarily need a lot of data about myself unless I'm trying to be an athlete.
Yeah. You mentioned there around the aging population, right, which is a very real thing in this country. As you mentioned, Japan already ahead of the curve. The whole Western world is, with birth rates and death rates, etc., living longer. The other part to that is kind of economic influences as well. And boutique studios often talk about community, and that being, such a compelling component. But is that enough when, we head into tougher economic periods? Pilates, reformer Pilates is not the cheapest thing that one can do. And as potentially economic times tighten people's purse strings, what do you think is going to make people come back?
Community is a really interesting one because I think you also have to think about, well, what is community? We sit with this as a studio. Our clients aren't necessarily hugely interested in coming and doing painting workshop, or they're not interested in that. They quite like the community within the class itself. And it's about, how do we as teachers deliver a really great teaching experience, but how do we also create the bonds? Like, I still have my Pilates friend from 17 years ago. We message each other. Like, there's a community within the class, and teachers need to do a better job, I think, of knowing their clients' names, of creating conversations and creating an inclusivity within their class environments, because people come in, they feel seen, they feel wanted, they feel known, they feel comfortable, they feel safe. And I think that's what's needed. So I think it's to remember that and the class itself is literally our product. And sometimes I think we've been a little bit too, oh, we should have this community event, that we've sort of forgotten to put the time into the teaching itself. And I think that's a really important thing. And I think when, inevitably, when you've got to create an experience that doesn't feel like a fad. You've got to create an experience that feels like they want to do it all the time and it helps them feel good. And Pilates for me was, I had a busy corporate job, and I always felt like I was never too tired to go. I was too tired to go running. I was too tired to do the boot camp classes that I was booked into. But I would always be like, well, I'm basically just lying down and I know I'll feel better at the end. And somehow in the middle of this was this magical workout that I managed to do. And I think that's what I've seen is when you have that kind of ethos and you help people have that experience, they want to keep coming back. And when you understand nervous system regulation, biomechanics, and you bring it into your classes, people go on a 2-week holiday and they feel rubbish. They're desperate to come back. Pilates is like the servicing of your body. It keeps everything running smooth and well. And I think it goes back to that method piece, because I think if you lean it into that has longevity. We have been around for a long time. This work has been around for a long time. It has endured. It has been busy. We have all had clients who have been around a long time. I worry, it's yet to be seen, if some of the more innovative studios who are trying to bring in, let's make it stronger or let's make it more like HIIT, I wonder if they will have the longevity of the clients. Will those clients feel like, no, I don't think this suits me anymore, or I've moved on to the next thing? And so I think if you're running a studio like that, you should at least balance it with some of the more traditional type work, because I think you would say that time has proven that has endured. That is the reason we are here in this boom.
Yeah. So looking ahead 5 years, what changes do you think the boutique fitness industry needs to make to remain commercially viable and, still culturally relevant? So you've kind of touched on it there, but what do you think it needs to continue to do?
I've been talking a lot on the podcast about a naming convention. I do think we need a naming convention. Now, I don't know who comes up with it. I had people message me in, and it's really interesting, Karl, wildly different, like wildly. And I talked to Brent Anderson about this because from Polestar, he was talking about, that we were chatting about the need to create some sort of regulation in the teacher training, which I think is also something that's needed. He said, it can't be done. We've tried, because nobody can agree exactly what this is. And I even said to him, like, could we create a naming convention? So if I'm here with my L5S1 disc issue, and I hear that Pilates is going to be really good for that, I don't walk into a reformer Pilates studio that teaches a far more athletic, lots of lunges and planks and that type of style. That's not going to help me with my bad back. Equally, if I'm, 22 and I've heard that Pilates can really give me a great workout, I'm not sure I want to walk into quite a restorative practice. Or maybe I would want to. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't have thought that at 22 when I first started, but I was kind of met with that. But I think that would be needed. And I would love to hear people's, thoughts on this, because there was a time when I qualified, really, there was classical and contemporary. And I was led to believe that my training was contemporary, meaning that rooted in the exercises, rooted in the ethos, but modern day science, principles, programming, and the ability to work with the client in front of you. And that made it contemporary. Now, contemporary means something quite different. And people refer to what I do as classical. And that's very confusing. So I think we need to look at that. I think that would help us so that clients can be met with better expectations and studios can do a better job of being able to cut through and make it clear what they're about. And as I said, I also think that we do need to look at how do we create some standardization in the teacher training. It is a very confusing place. I work in this industry, I have my own courses, and I still get confused. I'm lucky enough now on the podcast to get to talk to these huge people in our industry. And I ask them my questions and I feel informed, but it's still a very confusing place. I think, however, I feel passionate about writing a course that I believe brings the best of the best together. Okay, but I'm still, classed along with, we're all able to do this because of the lack of regulation. Now, there are things like the National Pilates Certification Program in America, which have created like a standard which could be used across any style. So it says it should be so many hours. It should go through these types of topics. And Brent was talking about how instead of making it a money-making exercise where it's like, I pay this money, you then affiliate my course and accredit my course, which I think everyone in the yoga world got quite frustrated with, and a lot of people have moved away from it. But maybe we could agree, and there are platforms like that one that are agreed, at the top across the different styles. They all agree. It should have about this many hours. It should include this kind of work. It should have these topics in it. That would be good. So at least you could, on a voluntary basis, say, we have followed this framework. This framework is accepted to be the kind of top standard or the base level standard that's out there, so that we could all kind of agree that. So at least then for a student looking for a course, they could see that a 60-hour course is very different to a 160-hour course. They could see that a course that follows that framework has to be led by someone who is comprehensively trained and has at least 5 years experience, which is very different to someone who qualified last year and now they're running a teacher training. It would explain that, because so I think they're the kind of two bits really, because again, it goes back to, Pilates is all about foundations. And I think they are the foundations in our work, and they're quite rocky. And I don't know if it's just my algorithm because I talked about it, but now it feels like The Guardian had an article about the Wild Wild West, and it's coming up. And it's coming up because there's just such a big wide range of how teacher trainings are operating. And you could get an accreditation by something that has nothing to do with Pilates. Nothing. It doesn't set the standard, but to a consumer, it looks like that's a better course than mine. Yeah, then you have people like Michael King have been trying to work on the level 3, but the level 3 now feels like it needs some work to it. And then how does someone come along and say, like me, and be like, I want to run a course. I spent a year writing it. I want someone to help me make sure that it's fulfilling all the criteria, but I also want the freedom to be able to say, in my 10 years of experience, these are the extra things that I think everyone's missing in their training. But level 3 doesn't let me do that. So it doesn't allow that to happen. So it becomes really challenging. So I think we have to come up with a solution. And I think it's been really interesting talking to the top people in this world who say the solution is not an official accreditation, because the styles can't agree exactly on what that would be, but there is an agreement on the level of hours and the type of content that needs to be covered. And I think if we could agree on that, I could bring that into the UK and say, let's have a UK version, and Australia could have it there. And we could kind of agree that there is some sort of a worldwide standardization without it feeling like it's dogmatic and it needs to be only done in this way, because that doesn't allow this work to grow. And this work does need to grow. For all that I talk about them, I'm not rooted in it must only be one way. It needs to grow, but it needs to grow with thoughtfully well-trained instructors who have spent time learning this work.
This is a topic we will continue to talk about on June the 3rd, which is a bit of a shameless plug for our event, but you can't buy tickets now because they're sold out anyway. So I'm
looking forward to it because it is it's an interesting conversation, Karl. It's a conversation. I would say there's almost not an episode on my podcast where it doesn't come up. People are frustrated. People are frustrated if they've spent, thousands of pounds and hundreds of hours coming out with the same certificate as someone who's done 2 days. And I think it feeds into all the questions you've asked about how do we have sustainability. So I think they're the pieces that need to be looked at. But my eyes were definitely opened that it's not as easy as people might think to fix the problem.
Yeah. I have 2 more questions for you, Nic. I suppose the first one, bit of a reflective one, really. Knowing what you do today, if you were starting your wellness business from scratch today, knowing how competitive and demanding the industry is, would you have changed anything?
I think when I opened 11 years ago, it was a lot easier to learn as you grow. There wasn't as much expectation from the clients, from the teachers. There wasn't as much competition. Even for teachers coming in now, they have to come in straight out of school and be good. Clients expect them. Clients are saying, oh, well, and I'm like, they graduated a week ago. Give them some grace. Give them some time. We have the time as teachers and we have the time as studio owners. Now you need to come in and you need to literally hit it straight off. So I was quite a few years in, Karl, when I realized that despite the fact my studio was booming, everything was full, I must have looked minted. There was hardly a penny left for me at the end of it. And that's a common story. And I went and did a very big and very expensive business training. Best thing I did, utterly changed my life, changed the business, made it far more sustainable. And that's the piece I would do. I would do that, and I think if you're opening a business, put that into your business plan. You need to spend $10,000, $20,000. That's how much these things cost to have that kind of support. I think I would have also understood that the teachers need that support straight off. Now, I'm not sure how good a job I would have done because I opened a studio straight out of graduation myself. But how do we get the teachers consistent with the depth of knowledge? I think the way you do it is to bring in, there are great educators out there who will come and do a day at your studio. Michael King's done a day at my studio. Diane Nye from Polestar's done a day at my studio. Inspire people who've inspired you. You can reach out to them and many of them will do this. And I think I would have done that earlier. So I think it's the business and the teaching earlier. I think in this day and age, if you don't do that, you're going to get left behind. Yeah.
Great advice. Last question. What has given you unbridled joy in the last week?
Unbridled joy. I feel like I'm not the best at joy, Karl, to be honest. I feel like I get to live this happiness? Happiness, something. Yeah. I get to live this incredibly privileged life now where it's not that I don't burn out and it's not that this isn't a job, because this is a job. All work is work, but I get to do something that I absolutely love so much. And it gives me such joy and it gives me such a passion and such a drive. And I went and ran at the weekend, the first reformer training that we've done outside of our studio. So that was kind of my vision. I was like, I don't necessarily want any more bricks and mortar studios, but I was seeing that the need for teacher trainings was great and good teacher trainings. So we got approached by a studio in the Cotswolds, and it was amazing to go into a studio who really didn't know me and to share this work in the way that I've written it. A lot of people there are career changers, but quite a few people on the course had done other big trainings, and they were kind of blown away by the depth of this work and the simplicity of it at the same time. We don't need to overcomplicate it. Let's just understand it. And I think that's what's given me the most joy at the moment, is this feeling of sharing this work and taking on all that I've learned and, having put it into a training and being able to share that. And I hope to do a bit more of that because it's lovely, and to sort of see how this work, I literally opened the studio, Karl, to share with others what had been shared with me, to share with others how my life had shifted, how I had learned that we could live and move and feel differently. And I had a time where I thought I was going to open 50 studios and I was going to do it in that way. And then I realized that actually, in order to do this, to truly share this with more people, it's about getting the teachers out there into their communities. I truly believe that if you learn this work with depth, you can teach any style, but you'll teach it well. And I think that's what I'm passionate about doing. And that's what's giving me lots of joy at the moment.
Fantastic. Well, Nic, thank you so much for taking the time to come on to our podcast. How did it feel being the other side of it? I mean, feels pretty good to me.
Well, I do love to talk. I always sort of joke that I don't really have any gifts in life apart from maybe talking. I don't sound it anymore, but I'm Irish. So in Ireland, we love to chat. So, the world of Pilates is interesting. It's interesting to talk about. So no, it wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be coming up to this. So no, thank you for having me as a guest, Karl. What an honor. First time I have been a guest on a podcast.
Oh, there we go. Wonderful. Well, all for first. Well, look, thank you so much. We're looking forward to, again, continuing the conversation at our event on June the 3rd. It's been an absolute delight to chat to you, Nic. And really great to get your perspective on everything and really useful insight for anybody that's in it today, considering it. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to meeting everyone on the 3rd. So I'll hopefully see some of your listeners and our listeners there. So that'll be great.
Indeed. All right. Thank you so much, Nic. Bye for now.
Bye.